The reinforced steel door of the transport sealed shut with a sound like a breaking bone, and I knew right then that the man sitting across from me was walking to his own execution by choice. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Before we push further into the frozen wastes with this one, do me a favor and drop a quick comment right now, letting me know what city or country you are listening from. It always blows my mind to see how far these stories travel, and it really helps out. All right, let us get back out onto the ice. I am the commander of the 7th Assault Group, and my entire life has been measured in ballistics, threat assessments, and the deafening roar of dropships. But nothing in my military career prepared me for the deafening silence of a man named Cale. I met him at the perimeter base just before the deep freeze hit. The outpost was a miserable stretch of concrete and frost, and the men under my command were already tense, checking their thermal regulators and arguing over rations. Cale did not argue. He did not speak to anyone. He just stood by the blast doors, watching the howling white expanse of the glass wastes, like it was an old enemy he was finally ready to face. He was a deep system navigator, hired by the higher-ups to guide my squad to a decommissioned neural archive facility 300 miles into the dead zone. When I approached him, he did not ask my rank. He did not ask how many men I had lost in the last skirmish. He just looked at the heavy assault rifle slung across my chest, then down at my heavy armored boots, his eyes calculating the exact weight I carried. "You are carrying too much ammunition," he said. His voice was low, raspy from breathing too much cold air over the years, and steady in a way that made my pulse hitch. I told him my name was Commander Thorne. He nodded once, turning back to the storm. That was my first warning. The wastes were not just cold, they were violently indifferent. Within the first few hours of our march, the wind became a physical wall. I marched at the head of the column, but Cale was always a few paces ahead, cutting through the snowdrifts with a brutal, mesmerizing efficiency. I found myself watching the line of his shoulders, the way his heavy thermal coat snapped in the wind, the precise, economic way he moved his legs. There was a rigid discipline to his body, a set of rules carved so deeply into his bones that he seemed to be fighting a war inside his own head. I ordered a halt when the proximity alarms on our wrist monitors started screaming. Scavengers. They burst from the snowbanks like ragged ghosts, firing kinetic spikes that shattered the ice around us. "Take cover!" I roared, lifting my rifle and returning fire in controlled bursts. The deafening crack of weapons echoed through the canyon. I moved to flank them, boots slipping on the slick ice, when a kinetic spike grazed the armor plating near my ribs, knocking the wind out of me. I hit the ground hard. Before I could recover, a hand gripped the back of my tactical rig and hauled me behind a jagged outcropping of blue ice. It was Cale. He did not have a weapon drawn. He was completely unarmed, yet his face was intensely calm. "Let them pass," he whispered, his face inches from mine. His breath plumed in the freezing air, brushing against my cheek. I could smell the faint scent of ozone and strong, bitter coffee on him. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but looking into his dark, focused eyes, the chaos around us seemed to instantly mute. "They are hunting, not fighting," Cale said softly, his gloved hand still gripping my chest plate. "If we stay still, they will follow the echo of your shots down the valley." We waited in absolute silence. His hand remained on my chest, strong and grounding, as the scavengers moved past our position and vanished into the storm. When it was clear, he pulled his hand away, and the sudden absence of his touch left a strange, hollow ache in my lungs. By nightfall, the temperature plummeted to a level that could snap exposed steel. We found shelter in a narrow, naturally formed ice crevasse. My men set up their thermal tents near the entrance, but Kale moved deeper into the cavern, setting his small pack on a flat slab of rock. I followed him. I watched him unlace his heavy boots with methodical, almost punishing slowness. He did everything exactly the same way. Left boot, right boot. Left glove, right glove. It was not just routine, it was a barricade. I sat down across from him, the small thermal heater casting an orange glow over his sharp jawline and the deep shadows under his eyes. "Why did you take this contract?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You are a civilian. This route is a death sentence." He did not look up from his hands. He rubbed his freezing knuckles, the skin pale and cracked. "I took it because the archive facility holds the echo chamber," he said quietly. "They say the machine extracts the heaviest memory a man carries, digitizes it, and burns it away. You just walk out empty." I leaned forward, the leather of my tactical suit creaking. "And you want to be empty?" I asked. He finally looked at me. There was something buried deep in his gaze, a profound, suffocating exhaustion that made my throat tight. "No," he said. "I want to know if I am already corrupted beyond repair." The storm raged outside for 2 days. We were trapped in that narrow cave. The thermal heater failed on the second night. The cold became a physical entity, pressing its fingers into our skin. To prevent hypothermia, survival protocol dictated we share body heat. I ordered my men to double up. I moved my sleeping mat next to Kale's. He stiffened as I lay down beside him, his whole body turning rigid. "Relax," I whispered, my voice rough. "It is just protocol, Kale. You are burning too many calories staying so tense." He did not answer, but slowly, agonizingly, he let out a breath and relaxed against me. The heat of his body beneath the layers of thermal fabric radiated against my side. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his heart against my shoulder. I had commanded hundreds of soldiers, faced down impossible odds, but lying there in the dark, feeling the subtle shifts of his breathing, my chest constricted with an intense, overwhelming urge to protect this man. I wanted to ask him what he was running from, but I knew the silence between us was fragile. On the third day, the storm broke, and we continued the march. The landscape changed from jagged ice to a smooth, glass-like expanse covering an underground lake. We had to cross a long, naturally formed ice bridge that cracked in protest with every step. My men crossed first, stepping carefully. Kale went next, but halfway across, a massive fissure spider-webbed beneath his boots. He froze. For the first time, I saw genuine panic in his posture. "Kale," I called out, stepping onto the fragile bridge. "Do not move." I walked toward him, feeling the ice groan beneath my heavy armor. I reached out, stripping off my heavy tactical glove so I could feel the reality of the moment. "Give me your hand." He stared at my bare hand, hesitation rolling off him in waves. He was a man who had never allowed himself to be pulled to safety. "I am not going to let you fall," I said, my voice dropping lower, holding his gaze. "I promise you." Slowly, his shaking hand reached out and gripped mine. His fingers were freezing, calloused, and impossibly strong. I pulled him forward, steadying him against my chest as the ice cracked behind us. We made it to the solid ridge, but I did not let go of his hand right away. Neither did he. He looked up at me, his breathing ragged, and in that split second, the distance he kept between himself and the rest of the world completely vanished. I realized then that I was hopelessly, deeply drawn to him. By the end of the week, the jagged metallic spires of the archive facility loomed out of the fog. It was a massive, brutalist structure half buried in the snow. As we approached the main blast doors, Kale stopped walking. He stared at the dark entrance, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. I signaled my squad to secure the perimeter and wait outside. I walked up to Kale, standing close enough to block the wind from hitting him. "This is it," I said quietly. "The chamber is inside. You do not have to do this if you are not ready." He shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the rusted metal doors. "You do not understand, Thorn. I have to, because if I do not step into that machine, I will never know if I deserve to live." We stepped into the facility together. The air inside was stale, smelling of ozone and dead electronics. Our boots echoed loudly against the metallic grating. At the center of the massive atrium stood the echo chamber, a towering glass and steel cylinder surrounded by dormant diagnostic screens. Kale stopped 20 feet away from it. The silence in the room was suffocating. I waited. I did not push him. I just stood there, a hardened soldier with a rifle slung over my back, offering the only thing I could, my presence. "Why are you so terrified of it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper in the vast room. Kale swallowed hard. His shoulders slumped, the rigid posture he had carried for hundreds of miles finally breaking down. "Because the machine demands the absolute truth of your deepest shame," he said, his voice trembling. "In the academy where I was raised, obedience was everything. Our bodies and our minds belonged to the state. When I was 16, an instructor, a high-ranking officer everyone respected, called me into his private quarters." He stopped, staring at the floor. The only sound was the hum of my thermal suit. "He took things from me, Thorn. He used his rank to break me down." I had no words for what was happening. I only knew that I felt entirely hollowed out, entirely consumed by terror. My chest seized. The heavy rifle on my back suddenly felt like it weighed nothing compared to the crushing gravity of his words. I stepped closer to him, my boots scraping softly against the floor. "So I stayed silent," Kale continued, lifting his head. Tears were silently tracking down his weathered face, freezing in the cold air. "The state taught us that weakness was a disease. If I spoke up, they would have purged my younger brother from the academy for being tied to a defective bloodline. I believed that by staying silent, I was absorbing the rot. I believed that I was corrupted. I believed that the silence was a sin that infected my very core. That is why I need the machine. I need it to rip this filth out of my head." I looked at this man, this incredible, resilient, deeply wounded man, and I felt a profound anger, not at him, but at the world that had convinced him he was broken. I stepped directly in front of him, closing the distance entirely. I reached out and gripped both of his shoulders. "Kale, look at me," I demanded softly. He forced his eyes up to meet mine. They were filled with decades of agonizing shame. "What he did to you was an atrocity," I said, making sure every single word was clear and heavy with absolute certainty. "It was his corruption, not yours. You were a kid trying to protect your brother. You survived the only way you knew how. There is no sin in your silence. There is only an incredible, impossible strength." Kale let out a choked breath, his hands coming up to grip my forearms like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "You cannot know that," he whispered desperately. "I do know it," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Because I am looking at you right now. I see you, Kale. All of you. And there is nothing inside you that needs to be burned away." We stood there in the freezing ruins of the archive, our breaths mingling in the air. For a long time, the only sound was his ragged breathing. Slowly, his grip on my arms relaxed. The tension that had defined his entire physical existence seemed to melt away, leaving behind a man who was finally allowing himself to be tired. He turned to look at the echo chamber. The glass was dark, dead. He took a slow step toward it, then another. He reached out and placed his bare hand against the cold glass of the machine. He did not try to power it on. He did not step inside. He just stood there, breathing. "I thought I needed a machine to forgive me," he said quietly, his voice echoing softly in the massive room. I shook my head. "Forgiveness is for the guilty. You were always innocent." Kale turned back to me, and for the first time since I met him in that miserable outpost, the crushing weight in his eyes was gone. He walked back to me, his steps lighter, entirely different. He did not look like a man bracing for an attack anymore. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached up, his fingers brushing gently against the armored plating over my chest, a fleeting, intensely intimate gesture that sent a rush of heat straight through my blood. "Thank you," he said simply, "not for bringing me here, but for witnessing me." We left the facility an hour later. Kale did not leave anything behind in that machine, because there was nothing he needed to lose. The storm outside had cleared, revealing a brilliant, piercing blue sky over the frozen wastes. We walked back toward the squad together. He was no longer walking 10 paces ahead of me like a scout expecting an ambush. He walked right beside me, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we navigated the snowdrifts. We did not talk much on the journey back, but the silence between us had entirely changed. It was no longer a barricade. It was a shared space. It was something deeply ours. When we finally reached the extraction point a week later, the transport ships were already waiting, engines roaring, kicking up clouds of white snow. I stopped at the ramp of my command ship, turning to face him. His contract was fulfilled. He was free to go back to the shadows. But as he looked at me, I knew neither of us was walking away from this. "Are you heading back to the perimeter base?" I asked, my voice tight, struggling to remain professional over the roar of the engines. Kale smiled. It was a small, quiet thing, but it completely transformed his face. "I think I am done being a guide," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a steady, quiet intensity. "I think I am ready to figure out where I actually want to stay." Healing does not always require a grand confession to the entire world. Sometimes it just requires one person to look at you in the dark, without judgment, and remind you that you were never broken to begin with. Thank you all so much for listening to the very end of this one. This story had a massive emotional weight to it, and I really want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Kale was right to keep his silence for so long to protect his brother? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Stay safe out there.